Becerra versus Hilton is the matchup, and the first real artifact of the general comes as a $216 million invoice with Tom Steyer's name on it, not a poll. This is the California governor's race. Today, both campaigns start building who they actually are. Hilton on the BBC, Becerra through an op-ed surrogate.
And I'm done relitigating the primary. The bracket's locked. Now I want to know if either of these pitches survives a week of daylight.
So let's start with where Hilton chose to make his first move, and it wasn't Sacramento.
The BBC. His first UK press since advancing, and he goes international before he goes to the Central Valley. That tells you who he's actually talking to.
That's a deliberate audience choice, a foreign outlet, an outsider reformer frame, common sense overhaul. He's sending donors a legitimacy signal, not trying to win over declined-to-state voters in Fresno.
Right. And here's my problem. What does that cost him? The voter who already clocks him as an import doesn't warm up because the BBC took the meeting.
Credit where it's due, though. He's running overhaul, not rigged. He picked the bureaucracy and decline lane and stayed out of the fraud lane entirely.
Which is exactly the edge he's trying to sand off. Now he has to prove a common-sense overhaul is even deliverable, and Cal Matters just walk through why it might not be.
That step-back piece does the unglamorous work. Legislature, courts, ballot measures, local governments, all boxing a governor in. Newsom's the case study, and the budget's the only real lever.
So both of these guys are pitching transformation, and structurally, the answer is the budget framework and not much else. Hold that thought next to overhaul.
Now, Becerra's answer to all this came through a Cal Matters opinion column. Workhorse, not show horse. And I want to name the tier before either campaign launders it. It's an opinion piece rather than a news story.
Workhorse is a nice frame. It's also conveniently quiet on the Chevron and PG&E committee money sitting next to his progressive infrastructure pitch.
That gap got more visible today, not less. You make the positive institutional case and just route around the corporate donor tension. California YIMBY endorsed anyway.
YIMBY's bet is durability over flash. Fine. But reliable institutionalist is the read that either settles that donor tension or deepens it, depending on how cynical you're feeling.
And then there's the Steyer autopsy. Yahoo News finally puts a dollar per point number on it. $216 million, third place, killed by message saturation.
This is the one I've been waiting for. The billionaire ceiling story is there, sure, but the spending curve is nastier. At some dollar figure, repetition actively destroys you.
And that figure now sits right next to every promise Hilton and Becerra make about communicating an agenda, a concrete benchmark for what saturation actually buys.
It's a November warning label for Becerra's own ad strategy. And the unsettled piece. Can that billionaire skeptic energy bleed right to Hilton? The mechanism's fatigue, not just wealth resentment.
Which is the live test of that NY Mag frame? Hilton's win is really Becerra's. The BBC interview is the first evidence he can build an affirmative case that isn't just Trump consolidation.
First evidence, sure. International press treating him as a serious story does update the long-shot file. Doesn't mean the overhaul pitch survives contact with the budget math.
BBC News with Jude Sheeran.
Steve Hilton, the former senior advisor to David Cameron, has told the BBC his bid to be California's next governor is a campaign to save the state from what he describes as overbearing bureaucracy and economic decline.
Here's the audience choice worth naming. Hilton made his first interview since advancing BBC Radio 4, ahead of Sacramento or the Central Valley. He's talking to London before Fresno.
Right. He's making a legitimacy play for donors and the international press, not a swing county pitch. What does that cost him with the decline to state voter who already files him under outsider?
And the frame has sharper edges now. Tax cuts, deregulation, cutting what he calls bloat and waste, all wrapped in common sense, not ideology. That's the Becerra-Hilton general getting its first real pitch.
The quickest way to get money into people's pockets is for government to take less out. Clean line. 16 years of one-party control is his villain. Longest single-party stretch in modern state history, per the BBC. Easy target.
From Dan Walters at Cal Matters.
Becerra will face Republican Steve Hilton in the November general election and is the overwhelming favorite. It's been 2 decades since any Republican won statewide office in California, Schwarzenegger's re-election in 2006, and Democrats have a very wide advantage over the GOP in registered voters, 45% to 25%.
So this is a Cal Matters opinion column. Dan Walters making the case that Becerra would be a workhorse, a governs-the-job type, rather than a Newsom-style springboard act. Fine frame. But it's opinion, not reporting, and I'd bet money Becerra's people are already screenshotting it as if it were.
Right after Hilton just told the BBC he's the common-sense overhaul guy. So now we've got dueling identities. Outsider reformer versus steady institutional grinder.
And the column leans on this 6-5 split. 11 post-war governors, roughly half chasing the White House. Newsom's the latest. His term ends in 6 months, and everyone knows the presidential campaign's coming.
What I notice is what the piece doesn't touch. You want to sell me reliable institutionalist? Fine. Then explain the Chevron and PG&E committee money sitting next to the progressive stamps. Walters skips it clean.
Workhorse is a comfortable word. It doesn't have to answer who's feeding the horse.
Every candidate running for California governor promises big changes: housing, schools, public safety. But how much can a governor actually do on their own? And where do they keep hitting walls?
That's the tension, and Newsom's tenure is a useful case study heading into 2026. A governor does have real levers. They propose the entire state budget, which Cal Matters describes as the document that provides a framework and funding for critical public services, from K-12 schools to housing to healthcare. But the legislature has to negotiate it and pass it. And with Newsom staring down a projected $18 billion deficit, whoever comes next inherits those same structural constraints before signing a single bill. Education shows the same thing. Newsom just proposed moving the Department of Education directly into the executive branch to give the governor more direct control, but that still needs legislative approval. On housing, Cal Matters notes Newsom's goals remain unfinished after 7 years of trying. Local zoning fights, court challenges, ballot measures, any one of them can slow or block what Sacramento wants. Taxes, same deal. Progressive Democrats have repeatedly tried to raise taxes on corporations and the wealthy, and per Cal Matters, they've long fought and failed, partly because major tax changes in California require a 2/3 legislative supermajority or a statewide ballot measure vote.
So if the governor can't just flip switches on taxes or housing, what's the job actually for? Is it mostly about setting the agenda and hoping the legislature goes along?
Pretty much. Agenda setting, budget priorities, and political pressure are the core tools. That's why Newsom spent much of his final State of the State address directly appealing to lawmakers to pass his agenda, instead of just announcing it. For 2026 candidates, voters should listen for the honest version. What can you get through the legislature, survive a court challenge, and hold together against a ballot measure campaign that could undo it the following November? From Yahoo News.
Californians couldn't escape billionaire Tom Steyer's political ads during newscasts, sitcoms, or sporting events, on streaming services, YouTube, influencer social media feeds, or in their mailboxes. Even the Puppy Bowl. Yet despite spending a record-shattering $216 million of his wealth on his run for governor, the Democrat failed to win enough votes in last week's primary to advance to the November general election to replace termed-out Governor Gavin Newsom.
$216 million. From 1% in November to 19% the week before the primary. And then nothing. That's the curve everyone's going to misread, because the easy read is Money can't buy it. Wrong. Money bought him 18 points. What killed him was repetition. The marketing prof in the Yahoo piece basically says he saturated past the point of persuasion.
Right, and that 19% ceiling is the number worth sitting with. He didn't fail to be seen. He was on the puppy bowl, Adam.
The puppy bowl. Your ad runs next to rescue beagles and voters still bail on you. At that point, exposure has turned into an allergy.
And here's why it matters past Steyer. There's now a $1 per point benchmark sitting next to every promise Hilton and Becerra make about communicating an agenda. 216 for a third-place finish is the cautionary number on the wall.
If you're following the governor's race, you might also like San Francisco politics and urbanism daily. City Hall, Muni, housing abundance, public safety, schools, and small business permitting. It's another lens on California power, wherever you listen to podcasts. We've put links to every story from today's briefing in the show notes, so if one caught your ear, you can go deeper there. Thanks for spending part of your Friday with us. That's the California governor's race for today. This is a Lantern podcast.